movement rather calling itself #Put South Africa First is planning a march to the Union buildings on the 24th of November. They plan to demonstrate against the extension of Zimbabwe Exemption Permit. Zimbabwean Exemption Permit Holders Association approached the courts to declare them permanent residents as they have stayed in the country for more than 10 years. #Put South Africa First says their march is not an act of xenophobia against Zimbabweans, but a call to government to address immigration issues in the country. We are joined to discuss this issue by Otilia Maunganidze, Head of Special Projects at the Institute for Security Studies. Otilia, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. So just straight off the bat, right, we had secured time with the organizers of this movement, but as we are going on air, unfortunately, we're not able to get a hold of them. Perhaps just help us understand, this is not, according to them, a xenophobic movement, but a call for South African government to do a little bit better in terms of legislative frameworks on this issue in this country. What do we say?
Right, a difficult and loaded question, because obviously the protesters argue that it's not against Zimbabweans in particular, but of course the organization of this march and a prior march was targeted at Zimbabwean nationals alone, even though South Africa does have special dispensation permits also for Angolan nationals and nationals from the Kingdom of Lesotho. Now, it would seem that this is specific to Zimbabwean migrants. Now, going into essentially the existing legal framework, obviously through the Department of Home Affairs, you can have a range of different permits or visas that allow you to stay in the country. The just over 200,000 Zimbabwean nationals that are on the special dispensation permits are people that had originally come into South Africa prior to 2010, and then some who arrived in that year, but whose permits were either not extended or stayed beyond the initial term of their visa. And the South African government then sought to regularize their stay. People that are either working or already in study or with their own businesses. So it was a very limited application in terms of who could apply. So not all Zimbabweans in South Africa could apply for this permit, in the same way that not all Angolans or people from Lesotho can apply for the special dispensation permits for those countries as well. But of course, because it has a country to its name, it becomes an easy target, I would say, to call for reforms within the Department of Home Affairs. Now, do we know that over the years, specifically African migrants within South Africa have faced, targeted comments, some of them xenophobic, on the basis that they are unlawful or illegal migrants. So this is not an isolated concern or issue, but it's something that we have seen boiling within South Africa for over a decade now.
South Africa is not the exception to the rule, right? There's many other countries, especially when we take a look at the fact that most of the migration happening is within the continent, outside of that misconception that a lot of Africans are leaving the continent for Europe. So let's take a country like Botswana, for instance, if we use that as a case study. The Industrial Development Act of 2019 and its regulations of 2020. So the law aims to restrict business activities to locals and has listed 21 businesses ranging from bread, confectionery to furniture as protected. Is there something to be said about this model? What are other countries doing where this instance is concerned?
Right. So regulations similar to the ones that you cite in Botswana, are not rare. And in fact, even countries where migrants come from, or where they are, where they have more people leaving than entering, for example, have similar regulations to protect the local economy and to be able to stimulate employment locally. So it's by no ways a strange measure to have in place. And in fact, in posing your question, you indicated that the majority of migration in Africa is within the continent rather than out of it. So we see countries like Cote d'Ivoire in West Africa, Senegal and Nigeria, for example, being migration magnets within West Africa. Likewise, in East Africa, we see this happening with Kenya and increasingly with Tanzania as well. Now, having laws in place that ensure that certain industries, primarily industries of benefit to the economy, allow for primary employment of nationals, but also where they allow, let's say, 50% at least ownership by locals, is in fact to stimulate not only employment, but local investment in local industry. So there's nothing inherently wrong with having such measures. Where it gets complicated is where there are very specific regulations, for example, that in fact make it difficult for people from neighboring countries to be able to travel lawfully into their neighboring country. And the reason I say it makes it difficult is that unfortunately, and we know this, if people want to migrate, they will do so. If the legal channels to migration are restrictive or difficult or expensive, people will opt for cheaper, easier options. And unfortunately, those can be through illicit means, and then you're unable to properly regulate migration in your sub-region.
Atilia, we do have Ms. Gwena Mulekwa from #Put South Africa First in studio with us. Tumelama, how are you? Thank you so much for joining us. So we've been speaking to Ms. Atilia from the Institute for Security Studies, and maybe let you give us your version of events. What is this about? What is your call about?
Our call is for the government to want to enforce our laws in South Africa, more especially the Immigration Act of 2002, Employment Equity Service Act also, which I think it is of 2012. Yeah, so we need them to actually do those things. Now, as we speak in a country, yesterday, just a few days ago, let's just say a few days ago, the Minister of Finance, when he was giving his speech, he highlighted that 46% of South Africans are living on grant. And not that we are necessarily targeting Zimbabweans for that matter. We have other issues of illegal immigrants, but the issue that is there is that they are not just taking jobs that are actually, we are saying that they are crucial skills. So they are occupying entry-level jobs, which are mostly, let's say, you work in restaurants and you're not necessarily doing anything that South Africans can't do, actually.
Do South Africans want to do those jobs?
I think the narrative that has been there, and it needs to be corrected even by all of us in South Africa. When the Zimbabwean people came here, we sympathized with them and we welcomed them, and we are still sympathizing with them. But the narrative that was created by our people, even us as South Africans, because of we were welcoming of Zimbabweans, was that our people are lazy. We need to correct those narratives, because it's the one that now it's when you are saying that do South Africans want those jobs. But today when you work in a restaurant, if you hire by simply just hiring 5 Zimbabweans, the next 2 months, you'll find the whole staff is already Zimbabweans. There's no even South Africans to show that they're even hiring amongst each other. I've had people crying to me to say that we've been denied jobs in a certain restaurant, and those people are coming forward and giving me those kind of information. So it does say that maybe there is South Africans who want those jobs. There is South Africans in Ramulekwa, where I come from. They are not working. Our kids are dropping out of school. We are not addressing a lot of issues, actually. But those kids, they need to be somehow, we need to talk about that. We can't just necessarily focus on the graduates only in this country. We need to even talk about the issues that we have our kids who need those jobs, and we need to be the ones that are encouraging them to rebuild their life wherever they have lost it. So, but if we keep on saying, do South Africans want this? Do South Africans, that is the same thing that we are fighting for against, again, to say that this narrative of creating our people saying that they are lazy. It's a problem. What kind of a society are we building? And why are we building a society that is going to undermine South Africans, ordinary South Africans that we are not giving voices to in places like Ramulekwa, where I come from?
So essentially, Ma, you're saying that South Africa does not work for South Africans, right? So the issue with this protest that you are calling for, why Zimbabwe specifically? There is, a thought that says Zimbabweans are being targeted because, I mean, this applies also to other people from the rest of the continent. So why Zimbabwe specifically?
The ZPE issue is because of there's a quarter of Zimbabweans, a quarter of a million of Zimbabweans are working in South Africa. South Africans are not working. And this is a starting point to address the immigration issues. Unfortunately, it is what it is. We're going to have to start somewhere, and we are starting somewhere. This is us starting somewhere. So we are not necessarily speaking against the Zimbabweans nationals only. We are saying we want our government to enforce our laws, our bylaws, especially in municipalities, because now you just have these tuck shops, spaza shops everywhere. And if you look at the Immigration Act, it states there that at least you need to have 5 million, sorry, not billion, 5 million inside your account to open a certain shop. So now we have even this issue of security, even with the food. I think you have seen people were complaining that some people got poisoned. And it's making big rounds, those kind of things. So it's not necessarily that we are targeting Zimbabweans. We are actually saying that the issue in South Africa of illegal immigrants and the issue of economic migrants needs to be addressed. But it must be addressed correctly without leaving the ordinary South Africans out on these things, because we have done that.
Sure. Ottilia, I see you shaking your head. In agreement, disagreement?
Neutral. Let me go with that. I will say, Dudu, and it's a pity, obviously, that it's easier to scapegoat than to deal head on with the issues. And I appreciate what Kwena has spoken about now. She spoke about what are essentially the lack or limited implementation of labor regulations. Those are not migration regulations. It is industry or specific businesses, for example, that may not be adhering to labor regulations, not migration regulations. That a specific industry, and we've seen this, for example, even in the Cape Winelands, where because some wine farms or industries find it cheaper to employ seasonal labor from the Kingdom of Lesotho and to underpay for that labor, that they would do that instead of employing local people to perform that labor. Recognizing also that questions around basic income, even a living wage, remain unresolved. These are, and I'll repeat these are not necessarily migration issues, as they are questions of inequality, poverty, unemployment, and another issue that we haven't touched on, which are questions of crime and violence as well. That are issues that we have within the country. Of course, and there's mention of...
Ottilia, please just hang 10 for us. We desperately just need to go here, and we'll come back with this conversation. Please do stay with us. Hello again. Let's pick up on our discussion. So hashtag Put South Africa First movement is set to march this week against Zimbabwean Exemption Permit renewals. Just before we headed to the break, Ottilia Maunganidze from the Institute for Security Studies was about to finish her thought, Ottilia, about crime and poverty in this country and a need for us to actually look at that as well.
So the point I was making, and I'll be brief, Dudu, is we have a range of issues that we do need to address. Socioeconomic, primarily, but also related to the questions around crime and violence. Now, when, which is the case, and I've heard, for example, what's being said around questions of employment, around dispelling myths about whether or not South Africans are willing to work in certain industries. Now, I'm one of few people, perhaps, that insist that narratives such as that in respect of South Africans are deeply flawed because they ignore the real concerns that people are raising around unemployment and around poverty, for example, and around inequality. And then I put a comma and I say, but if the issue that it is foreign migrants that are in South Africa that are resulting in greater inequality, greater poverty, and greater unemployment, Or are these issues that are then either hyper-emphasized in some communities, and where you do have foreign nationals, it becomes easier to presume that if you get rid of these people that can be gotten rid of, so that can be deported or that can be sent back home, that we'll be able to solve our poverty, inequality, and unemployment issues. The reality is you have to ensure that you match your labor policies, your employment policies, as well as your inclusive and integration policies at the same time. Because getting rid of migrants is not going to solve those problems. It's just going to make people see them in a greater light and see that we still have to address inequality. We still have to address that in South Africa, Black women remain the most underpaid population, even where employed. So still earning below a basic wage, which is unsustainable, which entrenches inequality. And we're not going to address that simply by saying, improve the migration policy, because the migration policy is one small element of a bigger policy gap that we have that is meant to encourage an inclusive economy.
We have in studio Gwena Molekwa from the hashtag Put South Africa First movement. I would like to find out, yes, what was your level of exposure? I ask you, maybe somebody who's coming from Soweto. We always grew up with, people from outside of the country. Some people from South Africa actually spend time outside of the country in exile, right? So what was your orientation, and what is your orientation in terms of dealing with people who are not necessarily from South Africa, and your attitude?
I wouldn't say it's an attitude necessarily. Being Gwena Molekwa, those who know me know that I've been exposed to this, I think, starting even from high school, actually, because I went to the typical Model C schools, and varsity, obviously, and I stayed in Pretoria before going back again to Ramolekwa and be a teacher in my community. So I've always been exposed, like every other student that come to varsity, you get exposed, and then you see even more African foreigners when you are in the city, actually. So it's not naively because of I say I grew up in Ramolekwa. It's more about that I've been exposed. I do have friends from outside, and I don't have a problem with being around people from outside.
Sure.
But the issues that, as Put South Africa First, we want a lot of other things. We want the security of border. We want our borders to be protected. South Africa never had borders. So we can't just talk about immigration only, but not focus on the issues that we do have at the borders. I think even yourself, you get exposed to those things, especially in December and January, when Zimbabweans or African migrants are coming through Bay Bridge. You see how we don't even have borders. Then they will be crossing.
What do you mean
wherever.
South Africa doesn't have borders?
We've never had borders. I mean, that is just a fence. The GA was even, we were even laughing to say that it is a washing line, because they can just break it and come in. It's the same thing between us and even Lesotho. There's no borders, honestly. So we need to build on borders. We need to secure our borders.
Otilia mentions that, this is not going to be a magic wand. So you say that, the labor laws needs to be changed, or the migration laws need to be changed. Will that necessarily, according to you, fix the problem of South Africans?
It will not necessarily fix it, but it will be a starting point. You need to have a starting point. And after, when we have secured this, I'm sure even the government can see that there is indeed, we have socio-economic issues in this country. But it doesn't mean that if we are saying African migrants or illegal migrants for that matter, not specifically targeting Africans. I mean, you have the Chinese who are even just coming in this country. We don't even know that they even exist. And everyone is just coming. We have even people as far as Bangladesh. They own puzzle shops. What kind of a country is this?
That's unfortunately where we're going to have to leave it. Thank you very much to both our guests for joining us. Gwena Molekwa in studio from the hashtag Put South Africa Movement First, and Otilia Maunganidze from the Institute for Security Studies. It's definitely a conversation that we need to have, a bit more of time allowing. But yeah, we start with it, right? We just start talking. Thank you very much to both our guests.
Thank you.
Do stay with us when we